Hello and happy 2024. I am your everyday average Jonathan. I'm an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary things. I am a self-taught craftsman. I'm an amateur blacksmith and a novice woodworker. The items that I make tend to be whimsical in nature, fantastical, carrying times of a forgotten yore, if you will. Items like weapons and armor, structures, novelty items, practical items that I use on my ranch here in Colorado. Each week I take you on a new build with me. I show you my perspective, I show you my process. I don't edit out any of my mistakes. I don't edit out any of my aha moments. This week I will be making something that has a bit of history to me. I will be making a dagger, but not just your everyday dagger. I will be making a Nazgul dagger. From the books The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, there were fearsome characters called the Dark Riders, the Nazgul, the Ring Wraiths, and there were 9 of them. They were corrupted kings long since past the grave. And not only will I be making a Nazgul dagger, but I won't just be making just a Nazgul dagger. I will be making the dagger that stabbed the main character in The Lord of the Rings, Frodo, with and nearly brought him to his demise. This will be my interpretation of it. I've put a lot of thought into this, probably too much thought into this, and the way this knife was purpose-built for the job that it did, and I will show you how I go about building that. Let's get to the shop and get started. I believe it was in 1936 that the inimitable stories of The Lord of the Rings by the author J.R.R. Tolkien first came into existence. J.R.R. Tolkien crafted a world then that had never existed previously, actual languages, creatures, derivations on folklore beings like elves and goblins that had not existed previously. He created a world that after the first publishing of the book called The Hobbit went on to birth so many other fantasy realms, both in the fictional world like books and movies, but also in real life. We now know of things and we hear of things like the Renaissance Fair, things like Dungeons and Dragons, cosplay, LARP, and much, much more. Before Tolkien, elves were short and mischievous gnome-like characters. The creatures that you may know of now that are called orcs did not exist in popular culture. Dwarves, before Tolkien, were also smaller and more pixie-like in nature. Tolkien's expansive stories changed all of that. The Hobbit was a children's story indeed. It took place in a realm called Middle-earth of Tolkien's creation. Now, elves were tall and fair and quite formidable warriors if need be. Dwarves were broad-shouldered and powerful. Goblins, trolls, orcs were real foes of man, and they had their armies of their own at times. After The Hobbit, Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings as a trilogy to expand on Middle-earth that he created in The Hobbit. This was not children's stories, though. These were stories that had a lot of darkness in them. The fight between light and dark was clear and defined and tenuous. One of the main characters of these stories was a character named Frodo, and Frodo was actually a hobbit, and a hobbit is characterized as essentially about a half-sized man. A halfling, they also called them. Similar to a dwarf, but not as broad-shouldered or as formidable in size. They tended to be very meek in nature and very kind and unassuming and timid. Through a series of mysterious events, Frodo had in his possession a terrible artifact in the form of a golden ring, thus the name The Lord of the Rings. Frodo and his companions were being pursued across the realms by dark forces, most chiefly in the form of a small group of creatures called the Nazgul, also known as the Dark Riders, Ring Wraiths, or just simply the 9, because there were 9 of them. These Dark Riders were long dead kings of old that had fallen to the seduction and the power of the still living Dark Lord, whose name was Sauron. The 9 Dark Riders were essentially the special forces for the Dark Lord Sauron, doing his bidding across the realms, but at this point in the stories, they are searching for the one ring of power that came into Frodo's possession. Of the 9, Frodo and his companions were discovered by 5 of them. They fought atop a tall hill called Weathertop in a skirmish one night, where the 5 confronted Frodo and his companions. In this skirmish, Frodo was stabbed by one of the Nazgul with a dagger. While his companions finally fought off the Dark Riders for the moment, A grievous wound had been dealt to Frodo. Over the next few days, Frodo's companions did what they could to heal him, but Frodo grew worse and worse, until a last-ditch effort was made to save him. An elf called Glorfindel on horseback happened upon them. He took Frodo with him, placed him on his horse, and at great speed delivered Frodo to the one place in all of the realm that could potentially heal Frodo, an elven house called Rivendell. There, while the elven healers did what they could to save him, they discovered that the dagger that had pierced Frodo's side had in fact been broken off. A piece of the blade was still inside of Frodo, and that piece, through dark magic, slowly continued its way deeper and deeper into Frodo towards his heart. The elves found this in time, and they had it removed, and thereby saving Frodo's life. And the quest and the story continues from there. If you haven't read The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, you do not know what you're missing. It is one of the most defining, one of the most magnificent, epic, far-reaching stories to be told. It has defined my life in many ways, and I hope that you do take a chance to, at the very least, see the magnificent movies that were filmed now 20 years ago, but also crack the books open. You'll end up reading right through them, I'm almost sure of it. So, now, this dagger I've put a lot of thought into. To my imagination, this knife, this dagger, may have been crafted for one sole purpose: to purposefully penetrate and then crack off inside of the victim. Perhaps the intent of this weapon was to remain in the victim while slowly but surely working its way towards the victim's heart so that it could die a cruel and slow death, or allow the Nazgul Nine to continue tracking the victim while the victim slowly gets worse and worse. Tolkien writes in broad strokes. He does not go into details too often, and he never goes into details about the purpose of the weapons like this. So then it's up to us to craft the narrative behind this weapon. So then what would a dagger of a long-dead, corrupted king of old, whose sole purpose was to penetrate and then break off, what would that dagger look like? How would it be held in the hand of a dark rider still adorned in ancient armor? Where would this dagger be kept on the form of such a wraith? Would this dagger be brutish and cruel, or would it be devilishly elegant? Like I said in my intro, I've thought probably way too long about this, but I've come up with a concept in my head that I believe really does fit potentially what this dagger may have looked like, and how it would have been held, and how it would have been used. I'll be curious to think of what you think of my final design. So on to the actual building of it that I haven't yet covered to this point. You can see that I chose an old file, and files are amazingly great items to make blades out of, to make weapons, to make even pieces of armor out of. They're already hardened, they're already tool hardened. They're made to, especially a file is made to file off pieces of metal and wood. So I did something here where I was both heating up the jaws of the handle, if you will, to get them to, not forge weld, but just to get them to cinch up to the file a little bit better. But I also put my touch mark in there. I debated a lot about putting my touch mark in this weapon. Since this weapon was going to be a sinister weapon of evil, I don't really know if I wanted my touch mark. I ultimately decided not to. The way that this handle attaches to the blade, I was trying to make it as close to a dragon's mouth as possible, but even with my level or abilities in forging, I still needed to weld part of the handle to the actual blade itself so that it wouldn't come crashing out. I ended up off camera quenching this blade, and you will see what happens when you quench already hardened tool steel. Here's the blade. I was doing this on purpose to demonstrate to the camera. It had already broken and I welded it, but then upon hitting it with a few hammer strokes, the file that I had quenched became brittle hard and fractured right off. So, round 2, new file, ready to go, getting this handle back on the new file as a blade. Well, thank you for joining me for the first half of the Nazgul knife build. It's been interesting so far. Quite a few little mistakes were made.
I look forward to sharing with you the final half of the build that will be next week. Until then, be well.